What is the ZhongKao in China? Well, basically, the ZhongKao is an entrance examination for all middle school students. And if the students get a good score on the ZhongKao, they can get into a good high school. If they get a mediocre score, then they will most likely get into a mediocre high school. And if they get a low score, they'll probably go to a vocational school to learn some kind of trade or craft. And supposedly this correlates to their life goals and their expectations of making a high income and having a family. So, for example, if they get into a good high school, they'll most likely get into a good college and get a good job. And on the contrary, if they don't get a good zhongkao, they'll probably not get into a good college and not have a high paying job. Okay, so what does it actually test? It tests language like Chinese and English and math, which is the majority of it. But it also tests science like chemistry and physics and history. And a good one is physical education. It tests the students' 1,000 meter run for boys, 800 for girls, core strength for girls like sit ups, and pulling strength for boys like pull ups, and a couple of other things like broad jump, 50-meter sprint, and some other physical tests like that. Okay, so what are some current perspectives of the Zhongkao in China? Well, personally, as an educator, I have pretty much have a general consensus of how the students feel. They are completely dreading the Zhongkao because it pretty much just consumes their entire life. The parents put a lot of stress on them, and that's all they do pretty much is study for the Zhongkao. That's their goal. It's not really to help them grow as an individual, but all of their focus is to pass the test. Now let's talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Zhongkao. For the strengths, there are well, it can give high scoring students a chance to go to a good high school. Other than that, I can't really think of any other good strengths about it. There's more weaknesses than there are strengths. For example, they negatively affect the student, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically. For example, students will study so long and stay up all night trying to get good scores on their zhongkao that it affects their sleep. Emotionally, they can't focus on anything else. They can't have a personal life. They emotions are all out of whack, and the list goes on for the negative parts about the zhongkao. It definitely is more negative than positive. There is another aspect to the zhongkao. You could argue that it is good for the economy because their education industry does a lot of different tutoring and different training schools to help students pass the zhongkao, like if they're struggling in English or math or science. Personally, we had at my gym that my wife and I owned before, we would give classes for students trying to improve their PE zhongkao score. So this is another aspect that we can discuss further in detail. That it could possibly be good for the economy. But in general, I believe that it's a not a good thing for students because it just teaches students how to memorize answers for tests. It just teaches students not how to take the test and how to get a good grade on the zhongkao. It fails to help students learn how to think for themselves. It fails to help students learn how to do critical thinking, do teamwork. So the zhongkao, in a lot of ways, is harmful to a student rather than helpful for a student. Also, I can't really say much for other subjects like English, math, or science, but for the PE portion on the zhongkao, only like a couple of the events in the zhongkao test make sense. Like, for example, the running portion. Of course, every human should be able to run a certain amount of time, run a certain amount of distance in a certain amount of time. However, other events have really no relation or are not a good way to show a student's physical fitness level. For example, like the medicine ball toss, it's kind of silly. They have to throw a medicine ball a certain amount of distance. So I think that's just for an example, but I think the ZhongKao could be fixed to do a much better job, and probably not just PE, but probably other subjects as well need to have a better curriculum of how the standards and testing standards. So, in conclusion, the ZhongKao is an entrance exam for middle school students to get into a good high school, or conversely, a bad high school or vocational school. In general, current perspectives are very negative perspective on it. Both a lot of teachers and parents and students all think it's a terrible policy. It has very little strengths and many weaknesses, and it really should be changed in many people's idea.